In Chapter 2, we'll identify the basis in the Constitution for the concept of takings, and we'll discuss it as part of a bigger idea, what I like to call the big idea in land use law. Have you ever heard the axiom that one man's right to swing his fist ends when he reaches another man's jaw? Well, you can look at land use law in analogous terms. Local governments' rights to regulate the use of land end where they strike private property rights. Let's look at the right-hand side of this diagram first. What are police powers? Police powers are the ability of local and state governments to regulate behavior and enforce order within their borders for the betterment of the health, safety, morals, and general welfare of residents. Now, that's a mouthful. Here's what you need to understand about police powers. They're the set of rights held by state and local governments that give professional planners the ability to exercise the powers that they do. You should also know this about protecting the public health, safety, and welfare. It's a very broad set of powers. Let's look at a quote that comes from a 1954 Supreme Court case, Berman versus Parker. "The concept of the public welfare is broad and inclusive. The values it represents are spiritual as well as physical, aesthetic as well as monetary. It is within the power of the legislature to determine that the community should be beautiful as well as healthy, spacious as well as clean, well-balanced as well as carefully controlled." This means that police powers are not just about protecting safety. They're not just about the things that we normally associate with the word police. They include things that might seem as relative as aesthetics. Those are legitimate grounds for local government regulation. That's okay. So now on to the United States Constitution. If the right-hand side of our diagram is very broad, where does it intersect with the rights that are held to people? Well, if you look at the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution, it says in part, "No person shall be deprived of property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation." Now this second part, the part in italics, is what we're going to focus on this hour, and it is the Takings Clause. A short history lesson. The Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution wasn't originally part of the Constitution. It's part of the Bill of Rights, the first set of amendments to the Constitution. And the United States added the Fifth Amendment Constitution in part to place limits on the power and authority of the federal government. Now, if you're paying attention, what I've just said might have raised a red flag. In this balance, we're discussing the police powers that are held by local governments. But this protection on the other side, the constitutional rights, were designed to limit the powers of the federal government. And given that state, local, and federal governments are all separate, independently working governments, how do they meet in the middle? Well, the answer lies in another part of the Constitution, the 14th Amendment. So, back to a history lesson. The United States added the 14th Amendment to the Constitution after the Civil War during Reconstruction. At that time, the biggest concern was not the power of the federal government infringing upon personal rights. It was concern about state governments infringing upon personal rights. If you'll recall, the Civil War was fought in large part over rights that were denied to African Americans. So the core of the 14th Amendment is a limitation on the authority of all states with regard to their residents. So let's look more closely at the 14th Amendment. It says, "No state shall deprive any person of property without due process of law." Now, you'll notice the word state, which I've placed in italics for emphasis, is different than the language of the Fifth Amendment. You'll also notice that the Takings Clause isn't duplicated here in the 14th Amendment. But have no fear, the Supreme Court has said that through a process called substantive due process, these restrictions on the states in the 14th Amendment include the rights incorporated in the Fifth Amendment Takings Clause. Now, in the next chapter, we'll begin eminent domain, the first of our three ideas born out of the Takings Clause.